I want to wrap up today's discussion of A Long Way Gone by talking about an item that I've referred to previously and talking about an item of controversy. The item I've referred to previously begins with the idea of colonialism and its effect on the nation of Sierra Leone and how it may have caused many of the tragic events that led to the civil war that Bay chronicles, actually, perhaps civil wars that Bay chronicles. And I talked about the idea that there's a theory called post colonialism that examines the effect of colonial actions on nations that were colonized. And Sierra Leone definitely has a history of colonization by the British. It also has a history of slavery. And I think that as you're going through this history of slavery, it's important to look that there's a weird dichotomy. From the 1650s through the 1800s, slaves were kidnapped and brought to the North America to work in the southern United States or in the Bahamas. In 1839, there was a famous slave revolt on the ship Amistad, and that slave revolt was chronicled or depicted in a movie. Came out, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. Got a lot of praise as being a very powerful film, uh, emotionally impactful film. But at the same time, freed slaves were being returned to Sierra Leone, to Africa, and there was this weird dichotomy of people recognizing that slavery was immoral, but continuing to enslave people. And also, there was this, I think, weird dichotomy in the idea that even if somebody had been, living in the southern United States as a slave for his or her entire life, they were the third or fourth generation there, they were still being returned to Africa where they had no real connection. Great Britain was the colonial power that controlled Sierra Leone. And I think these dates here are important. 1808, Sierra Leone becomes a crown colony. Um, Britain gives it some local control in 1951, 150 years later, basically, gives it its independence 10 years later. And it's always been unclear to me, and I'm not an expert in the subject at all, but it's always been unclear to me how much local control they actually had and whether Britain did enough to groom people to become leaders. I'm not sure that that happened. Also, you'll notice that there were several issues where Britain tried to impose a tax and there were rebellions. This was not a peaceful situation all of the time. And so I think it's important to understand that they may never have had a chance. The people in Sierra Leone may never have had a chance uh, to break that cycle and to develop a strong uh, government, a tradition of peaceful transitions of power. The other thing that I think was problematic is the fact that they never had a chance to control their own destiny when it comes to the resources. And the diamond trade has caused people to be basically used as slaves to extract the diamonds, to work with their bare hands, to do grueling, backbreaking work. And in the book, I believe I mentioned this in class. In the book, there's a discussion about people attacking a mining area. It was this sort of mining area that was attacked, and the blood diamonds um, fueled some of the reasons for the rebellion or the effort to quell the rebellion and the back and forth. I will try to have the CNN clip in the description of this video so that you can watch it instead of just look at the one uh, quotation that's up here. The last thing I want to talk about is this book has caused some controversy. And the controversy involves whether this is a memoir or whether Bay created fiction. question number one is, did it happen? The background to the quotation I have up on screen is that a newspaper called The Australian did a bunch of research and uh, several reports that allege that Bay grossly exaggerated his story, that he probably was a child soldier for 2 months, not 2 years, and that many of the things that Bay claims happened, being shot in the foot, seeing murders at a refugee camp, didn't happen. And so you have this moving memoir, and then you have people saying it never happened. And so there's been a lot of there was a lot of controversy when this book came out in 2008. There have been other controversies about memoirs, and sometimes those memoirs have been republished with little notes uh, saying that facts were embellished, or that people, that to indicate that not everything is perfect, a perfect retelling, or not everything is totally accurate. That there are fictional elements in the book. This book has been republished repeatedly, but that doesn't seem to have been added to any of the covers that I've seen. The publisher obviously stands by the story, and you can argue that, of course, the publisher is going to stand by the story. This book came out in 2007, 2008, 13, 14 years. They're making money off of the book still. People like me are teaching it in class still. Of course, they're going to stand by the story. But I mentioned in class that Bay claims he had a photographic memory, and he tied it to the medicine that his grandfather made to help them remember things for the tests. Um, and the fact of the matter is, the way he and his agent and the publishers claim that the way he describes things and the way he remembers things lend veracity to his story. And the other thing I think that they're falling back on a little bit is what I will call a cheap defense for the truth. But if you look at the sentence, the conflict started in 1991. There were successive waves of violence, she says. That's what Ishmael is writing about. And the idea that she's trying to get across here, if I'm reading between the lines properly, is that even if it's not completely factual, it's still true. And I taught mythology for a lot of years. It was one of my favorite classes to teach. And one of the things I would go through on the definition of myth is that myths explained, which Bay kind of explains what happens when a civil war occurs and the dangers of that civil war, that myths explain the truth, successive waves of violence, never ending violence, cultural breakdown, but they may not necessarily be factual. And I think it's an important question to look at. Is this book factual, and does it matter? And then the last thing is a question about, why don't we just go find out the truth? Why don't we send people to Africa? Why don't we send people to Sierra Leone and look it up? And I think the question is answered by the publisher. The truth might be lost because it's decades old. And remember, this would have been 1991, 92 when the events happened. We're in 2020, so that's nearly 30 years ago. There was a civil war. Schools were burned, records were burned, government offices were looted, rebel camps were looted. Um, the idea of finding factual documents that back up Bay's story are unlikely. And second of all, I am not sure if we interview people who may have known Bay or who may have been involved in situations that Bay claims he was and didn't see him there. I don't know how accurate they are. If they were taking drugs at the level Bay describes in the book, are their memories solid enough to actually talk about something? Do they have an axe to grind? Um, does Bay have an axe to grind? All of those questions, I think, are an important element of trying to figure out the truth. It's a difficult continent to cover. 30 years back, or nearly 30 years back, I think makes it more difficult. Which brings me to today's daily writing. Does it matter if Bay's account is factual? Why or why not? Okay, and put this in the daily writing folder. Uh, I'll also have this copied and pasted into the daily writing document so you can double check it. And we will see all of you in class on Friday. Remember that Wednesday is mission day. So we'll see you all in class on Friday. Have a good one.